My name is Claire Morgan. I'm 34 years old. For most of my life, I believed in loyalty, family first, always. My older brother, Nathan, was my best friend growing up. Protective, charming, and endlessly confident. People adored him. But behind all that charisma was someone who couldn't stand to be second to anything or anyone. And when he saw something he wanted, he took it. Even if it was mine, even if it was the man I was supposed to marry. Evan and I had been together for 5 years. We met at a charity fundraiser where I worked the registration table, and he made a fool of himself trying to impress me by donating under 3 different names. He was kind, ambitious, and flawed in the ways that made him feel real. I loved him deeply. We had set a date, chosen a venue, bought a home. I thought our story was already written until it was stolen right out of my hands. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was slow and subtle. Messages that didn't make sense. Weekends, Evan said he was working, and the way Nathan started dropping his name more often in conversation. My brother, my blood. The man who used to hold my hand when I was afraid of storms. I caught them together one night. Not kissing, not touching, just looking at each other in a way that didn't belong to siblings of the bride. I didn't scream. I didn't confront. I simply walked away. 3 months later, I received the invitation, a white envelope with gold lettering. Nathan and Evan. I laughed out loud when I saw it, not because it was funny, but because the pain was too absurd to cry over. They didn't just betray me, they flaunted it, as if I was expected to clap, to attend, to bless their union with my silence. I RSVP'd yes, not out of forgiveness, not out of vengeance, but because some moments in life are too important to miss, especially when the truth is ready to walk down the aisle. And at that ceremony, Nathan didn't know it yet, but the wedding gift I brought would change everything. The wedding venue was everything you'd expect from Nathan's taste. Opulent, overdone, and dripping with performance. An estate in the hills, chandeliers even in the garden, champagne served like water. The kind of event where everyone's pretending and no one's asking real questions. I arrived alone, wearing the same necklace Evan once gave me for our 2nd anniversary. Subtle, deliberate, a reminder to myself, not of love lost, but of what they thought I'd forget. People turned when I walked in. Some out of curiosity, others out of guilt. A few even offered pitying smiles, the kind that cut deeper than insults. I returned each one with a nod. Calm and composed, no theatrics, no breakdown. I wasn't here to make a scene. I was here to let one unfold. You see, what Nathan and Evan didn't know was that I had already seen everything. Not just the affair. I had the text messages Evan had sent me by mistake, the ones he tried to delete. I had copies of the mortgage papers I alone had paid on our shared house documents. Evan tried to shift to Nathan's name behind my back. I even had a video, taken the day before they officially came out as a couple. It was Evan crying, telling a friend he didn't want to go through with the wedding, that he missed me, that Nathan had manipulated everything. I wasn't looking for revenge in that moment. I was searching for closure, and I realized something. They had taken so much from me already. My trust, my future, my belief in what was real. But there was one thing they hadn't taken. My power. That was still mine. And I planned to use it, not loudly, but unmistakably. The ceremony began just before sunset. Evan stood at the altar in a cream-colored suit, nervous, twitching. Nathan beside him, proud as ever. Their smiles didn't quite match. Something was off. And I knew why. The silence between them was growing louder. As the officiant asked the guests to rise, I did, but I didn't sit back down. I held a small envelope in my hand, sealed and marked with their names. I hadn't written anything dramatic, just the truth. Proof. My final word in a room full of people who thought I would remain quiet forever. The moment was near, and no one, especially Nathan, was ready for what came next. I could feel my pulse in my throat as I stepped forward, but my hands never shook. Not once. That surprised even me. There's a particular calm that comes when you stop trying to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. I wasn't there for closure anymore. I was there to return something that didn't belong to them. Not Evan, not the past, just the weight of truth. The officiant paused mid-sentence as I approached. I heard a few whispers, one audible gasp. Evan's face drained of color. Nathan's smile didn't move. He still believed he was untouchable. The charm, the entitlement, the idea that rules were for other people. It was all right there, behind those gleaming teeth. But I didn't look at him. Not yet. I turned to Evan. "You left without saying goodbye," I said, voice low but clear enough for the front 2 rows to hear. "So I thought I'd return the favor with something you left behind." I handed him the envelope, thick with printouts. He took it like it burned him. I saw the tremor in his wrist. Nathan leaned in, trying to read his face. "What is it?" he asked. Evan opened the envelope. The texts, the mortgage documents, and finally, the video transcript. His own words, spoken in doubt, fear, regret. His mouth opened, but no words came out. And for the first time in all this mess, I saw the man I once loved. Not the polished version, just the scared, human one. I almost pitied him. Nathan grabbed the papers from his hand, flipping through quickly. His smile cracked. I watched the blood drain from his face, the way his jaw clenched. He turned to me like a man who'd lost control of a story he thought he wrote alone. "What are you doing?" he spat. I tilted my head, measured. "Just telling the truth, something this marriage could have used." The officiant awkwardly cleared his throat, unsure whether to proceed or walk away. Evan was frozen. Nathan stepped forward, and for a moment I thought he might yell, argue, deny. But all he did was mutter, "You ruined everything." I looked him in the eye. "No, Nathan, you did that when you invited me." I turned and walked down the aisle. The same path I would have taken as a bride. The irony wasn't lost on me. But this wasn't a walk of shame. It was a walk of return. I wasn't losing anything that day. I was taking myself back. I didn't need to turn around to know the room had cracked wide open. The silence behind me was no longer reverent. It was fractured. What had been choreographed down to the second was now slipping out of Nathan's control. That was the one thing he never prepared for. A woman who didn't scream, didn't plead, didn't fight, but simply left the truth behind and walked away. Outside, the sky was beginning to dim, golden hour. I stood near the edge of the fountain in the courtyard, inhaling deeply. That moment, standing alone in a gown I didn't buy for them, beneath a sky that didn't care who said I do, was the beginning of something far more sacred than marriage. It was freedom. Inside, the ceremony stumbled forward. I heard later from someone on the catering staff that Evan walked off the altar 5 minutes after I left. Just walked away mid-vow, with a folded sheet of paper in his hand and no explanation. The guests were confused. Murmurs rose like smoke. Nathan tried to salvage the moment with a joke. No one laughed. That night, social media went quiet. No pictures, no stories, no Mr. and Mr. hashtags, just an awkward void. And then, a week later, the whispers started. About how Evan had left town, about how the wedding was legally voided, about how Nathan had been seen alone, drinking too much, talking too loudly. Their perfect moment had vanished. Not because I ruined it, because I refused to protect the lie that was holding it together. Evan texted me once. A long message, apologies, admissions, confusion. He said he didn't know what he wanted, only that it wasn't that I didn't reply. Not because I hated him, but because sometimes the most dignified thing you can do is leave a door closed, even when someone is finally knocking. Nathan never reached out. That didn't surprise me. He was never good at accountability. His pride was louder than his guilt. But me? I got quieter. Not smaller, just clearer. I moved out of the city, got a fresh start. I began writing again, something I hadn't done in years. The kind of writing that isn't for anyone else's applause, just my own healing. The kind that turns pain into perspective. And every time I thought about that wedding, I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt gratitude. Because sometimes, the invitation they send to mock you becomes the stage where you reclaim your voice. 3 months after the non-wedding, I received a call from an unknown number. I let it ring, then ring again. Finally, I answered. It was Evan's mother. Her voice cracked the moment she said my name, Claire. I just needed to say, I'm sorry for all of it. She said she'd found the invitation in her son's drawer, unopened, torn at the edges, like he couldn't bring himself to throw it out or read it fully. He had left the city, she said, gone quiet, wasn't returning calls, said he needed time to figure out who he really was. I listened silently. Forgiveness doesn't always come in grand declarations. Sometimes it comes in the way your chest doesn't tighten when you hear their name, in the way you no longer need them to feel pain just to know you mattered. I thanked her gently and hung up. I didn't ask where he went. A week later, I heard through a friend that Nathan was in therapy for the first time in his life, apparently not because he wanted to change, but because too many people stopped clapping. His friends had grown distant. His image, so carefully sculpted over years, was beginning to show cracks. He wasn't angry at me. He was confused. He had never seen dignity as a weapon, and it had undone him. Meanwhile, I was thriving. I'd moved into a small place near the coast, took up photography, even opened an online gallery showcasing real stories of betrayal and rebirth. People began messaging me, strangers, telling me they had lived through something similar, a sibling stealing a lover, a friend marrying their ex, a betrayal that forced them to either shrink or rise. I shared my story anonymously, at first, but eventually I owned it. Because what's shameful isn't being betrayed, it's letting that betrayal write the ending. One night, I stood at the shoreline, watching the tide roll in. That wedding dress I'd worn, the one they assumed I put on to beg or grieve, I donated it weeks ago to a theater company. I never wanted to see it again. It was a costume from a story I'd stepped out of. I didn't need revenge. I had resolution. And I realized then I never lost Evan. I lost the version of myself who thought I needed people like Nathan to be whole. What I gained was everything else. It was a rainy afternoon when I passed by a cafe where Evan and I used to sit for hours, dreaming about the future. I paused outside, watching the soft condensation on the windows, the couples inside laughing. Heads leaned close. It didn't sting anymore. That surprised me. Time doesn't just move forward, it reshapes you. It softens the sharp edges, then shows you the person you've become while you were busy surviving. I walked in and ordered a coffee. Sat at a corner table alone. No memories followed me in like ghosts, just quiet, just space. I opened my notebook and wrote something that came to me in a single breath. There's no revenge more powerful than living well without apology. I underlined it twice. That night, I revisited the envelope, the one I had handed Evan at the altar. I kept a duplicate, not for proof, but as a reminder, not of what they did to me, but of what I chose not to do in return. I could have burned them down. I had the receipts, the power, the fury, but I chose precision over fire, dignity over disaster. And because of that, I came out with more than my integrity. I came out with peace. Nathan had faded from public circles. His social media had gone dark. Friends of friends said he had taken a leave of absence from work. I wasn't watching closely, but now and then the world made sure I heard just enough. And every time I did, I felt nothing. Not pride, not pity, just distance. And peace lives best in distance. Evan resurfaced once. He published an essay under a pseudonym. I recognized the cadence immediately. It was about love, betrayal, and the lies we tell ourselves when we're too afraid to tell the truth to others. It ended with a line that stayed with me. Some wounds bleed in private for years before they finally learn how to scar. I closed the tab and said nothing to anyone. Because healing isn't a performance. It's private, sacred, mine. And I had no more use for rooms where I wasn't seen fully, wholly, or respectfully. I had built a new story now. Not one based on who I used to love or who used to break me, but on who I had quietly become when no one was clapping. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Spring came early that year, and with it, clarity. The betrayal that once sat like stone on my chest now felt like something distant, an old bruise the skin no longer remembered how to ache over. I began giving talks in small rooms, book clubs, community centers, even virtual panels about rebuilding after betrayal. Not as a victim, not as a warrior, but as a woman who walked out with her head high and her voice steady. People asked how I found the strength to attend the wedding. I told them the truth. I didn't go for revenge. I went to remind myself I still existed, and I mattered even when they tried to write me out of my own story. That line would go on to be quoted, shared, even published, but I never let it become ego. It wasn't a brand, it was a scar turned scripture. One day, I received a small package in the mail, no return address. Inside was a silver locket I hadn't seen in years. Evan had given it to me during our second Christmas together. I thought I lost it when I moved out. Tucked inside was a note, just 3 words. I never forgot. I held it in my palm for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just closed the box and put it away. Some things belong to the past, even the parts we once loved. Nathan never wrote, never called, but I heard from someone that he'd moved out of the city entirely, living quietly now, alone. That didn't bring me joy, only understanding. He had been running from his own reflection all his life. I just happened to be the mirror that cracked. And me? I started to love again. Slowly, carefully. Not with someone else, but with myself. I went on solo trips, took photos of sunrises, danced barefoot in my living room without needing someone to watch. I had stopped searching for replacement love and started discovering restoration instead. They gave me heartbreak, thinking it would break me. But all it did was strip away what was never real. And in the space that was left, I built something honest. Years later, I was asked to give a keynote speech at a women's summit. The theme was resilience. I stood behind the podium, looking out at a room full of faces, some broken, some rebuilding, some rising. I didn't prepare a script. I just told them the truth about betrayal, about silence, about standing at a wedding that wasn't mine and choosing not to fall apart, but to rise, slowly, one breath at a time. I told them how I never fought to destroy what destroyed me. I simply walked out carrying the only thing that ever mattered, my peace. When I finished, they didn't applaud right away. There was just a silence, deep, honest. Then the clapping came, not loud but real, and I smiled, not for the applause, but because I knew this was always the real wedding, a marriage to myself, a vow to never abandon my own heart again. Evan and Nathan became part of a story I rarely told, unless it helped someone else find their way. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need them to suffer. What I needed was exactly what I had, a life they could never touch, because they had never truly understood me to begin with. The betrayal had been loud, but my healing, it was louder. I walked home that evening, past a couple on a park bench. He was reading. She was resting her head on his shoulder. It didn't make me ache. It made me grateful, because I no longer needed to chase that image. I had found something quieter, deeper, something called wholeness. Back at my apartment, I opened the window and let the wind move through. No ghost of Evan, no echo of Nathan, just the sound of my own life, unfolding in perfect, beautiful stillness. They thought the wedding was the final chapter, but it was only the prologue. It was around the second anniversary of that almost wedding when I came across a box I hadn't opened since moving. Inside were keepsakes from another life. Photos, receipts, love notes written in rushed handwriting, the outline of a future that never happened. I sat cross-legged on the floor, going through them slowly, not with sadness, with reverence, like an archaeologist holding evidence of someone who used to exist, me, before the fire, before the rising. At the bottom of the box was an unsent letter. I'd written it to Evan weeks after the wedding, back when I thought closure could be mailed in an envelope. It was raw and long, and filled with everything I'd wanted to say but never had. I read the first line and stopped. It didn't belong to me anymore. That version of Claire had already been set free. I folded the letter back and dropped it into the trash. Later that night, I lit a candle and sat by the window. I thought about what I would say to the woman I was back then, broken, disoriented, shaking in her car outside a venue filled with betrayal. I think I'd whisper, "You're going to be more than fine. You're going to be unforgettable." The gallery had gained traction. Submissions from around the world now filled my inbox. Stories of survival, quiet power, rebirth after silence. I curated every image, every caption, like a ritual. The heartbreak that once caged me had become my cathedral, and I prayed in pixels, in light, in truth. A woman once wrote me, "I attended the wedding of the man who betrayed me. I sat through it in silence. Your story made me realize that silence was never weakness. It was me surviving with elegance." I cried when I read that, not because it hurt, but because it healed. That was the unexpected gift of it all. My pain had turned into a compass for others, and through helping them find their way back, I never once got lost again. There's something sacred about rebuilding a life after it collapses, especially when the collapse wasn't your doing. It forces you to be intentional. Every friendship, every boundary, every joy becomes something you choose, not something you settle for. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't performing worthiness. I simply was worthy. I began seeing someone quietly, a man who never once tried to outshine me, but always made room for me to be. We met at a photography workshop I led on storytelling through silence. He asked if I believed pain could be beautiful. I said, "Only when it teaches us how to stop apologizing for surviving." That was the start. He never asked about Evan or Nathan. He asked about my work, my mornings, the way I like my coffee. He didn't try to rescue me. He simply stood beside me, soft and sure. And I realized I didn't need a grand cinematic love. I needed peace that didn't require a script. Nathan eventually married someone else. I saw the announcement by accident, on someone's feed. I didn't feel a thing, not hate, not bitterness, just distance. That's when I knew the wound had closed entirely. You don't have to wish someone well to release them. You just have to stop bleeding. As for Evan, I don't know where he is, and I don't need to. He became a chapter, one with jagged edges, yes, but a chapter that ended. My story is no longer defined by what was taken from me, but by what I reclaimed, my voice, my worth, my life. All of it rebuilt from the silence they thought would break me. And in that silence, I learned something powerful. Sometimes the best revenge isn't becoming someone new. It's becoming fully yourself. I stood one morning on the cliffs just beyond the town where I rebuilt my life. The ocean stretched out endlessly before me, wild, unapologetic, alive. I had made a ritual of walking there at sunrise, watching the light arrive slowly, the way healing had in me. Not sudden, not loud, just sure, just enough. I thought about all the versions of myself I had been. The woman who gave too many chances. The one who waited for apologies that would never come. The one who RSVP'd to a wedding not to beg, but to begin again. And I smiled, because I loved all of her. Even the broken parts. Especially the broken parts. They were the scaffolding for the woman I had become. Someone once told me that betrayal is the most violent kind of honesty. It shows you who people really are when they think you have no power. But what they never account for is what happens when you rise from the rubble without needing their apology, their permission, or their shame. That kind of rising is permanent, untouchable. These days, people know me for my work, for my voice, for the stories I help others tell when they don't know where to start. I rarely mention Evan, never mention Nathan, not because I hide them, but because they don't define the arc anymore. They were the storm, but I was the one who learned to build in the rain. Sometimes people ask what I'd say to them now if I ever saw them again. I always answer the same: nothing. Because when you've turned your heartbreak into a lighthouse for others, you don't go back and relight the match that started the fire. You stand in the glow of everything they never imagined you'd survive. And you shine.